We begin this morning, though, with that message from President Biden urging Americans still living in Ukraine to leave the country as soon as possible.
The president spoke to our Lester Holt about the rising tensions in Eastern Europe and warned Americans that the situation could intensify at a moment's notice.
American citizens should leave now. We're dealing with one of the largest armies in the world. This is a very different situation, and things could go crazy quickly.
That warning comes as Russia ramps up its military exercises in Belarus and sends more warships into the Black Sea, actions that U.S. intelligence officials say could signal an imminent invasion. NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley is in eastern Ukraine, and NBC News correspondent Erin McLaughlin is back with us from the capital, Kyiv. Thank you both for joining us on this Friday. Erin, let's start with you. So why has President Biden issued this new warning now, and what does it mean for any Americans still living in Ukraine?
Well, the U.S. government has been warning for days now that U.S. citizens should leave Ukraine, citing the COVID threat as well as the military buildup on three sides of the Ukrainian border. The president's words last night simply punctuating that warning. There's about 7,500 Americans registered with the U.S. Embassy here in Kyiv and perhaps thousands more unregistered. And the president's message to those citizens that you need to leave now, warning that in the event of an escalation, in the event of an invasion, the United States will not be sending troops into Ukraine itself to evacuate those citizens, instead staging the evacuation from nearby Poland. So should Russia invade, it will be up to those citizens to get themselves through the western portion of the country and out to the Polish border. You know, I've been speaking to U.S. citizens here. Many say that this is their home now. They've been living here for years, and they're adamant that they want to stay. They say they want to stay and fight for their second country, guys.
Now, Matt, we know there have been ongoing negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, with negotiators from France and Germany also weighing in on a possible diplomatic solution to the crisis. What more can you tell us about how those talks have been going?
Yeah, well, those talks were in Berlin, and they ended yesterday almost as soon as they started, and it was very frustrating for everybody involved. The diplomats who were there, and again, this is the meeting of what's called the Normandy 4, sometimes called the Normandy format, and it's trying to sort of revive this Minsk II agreement that really is just about resolving the situation in the eastern part of this country in the Donbass, not about even the larger issues around NATO and European security. But essentially, those diplomats, they couldn't even come together to agree on a statement about why they failed. It was just such a demoralizing experiment. And, you know, this has been a week of failed diplomacy. We saw also Liz Truss yesterday, the foreign secretary of the UK. She had a meeting with Russian diplomats that ended terribly, where essentially she was told that it was you know, sort of like the deaf leading the blind. It was insulting. And this is what we've seen time and time again from Russian diplomats and leaders, essentially talking down or diminishing Westerners, Western diplomats and leaders who are trying to resolve this situation. It doesn't leave much hope for a visit next week by Olaf Scholz. He's the Chancellor of Germany. He's kind of the last best hope that Western leaders or diplomats could be able to resolve this through diplomacy. He doesn't have necessarily the confidence of the U.S. or a lot of other Western capitals. So it's hard to see how his visit is necessarily going to improve things. Guys?
Erin, I want to get into the optics behind Russia's latest war games around Ukraine. I know you recently sat down with Ukraine's former defense minister who spoke to you about how Russian President Vladimir Putin is approaching this entire situation. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right, Joe. Right now, he said that there are three pressure points in this crisis, essentially. You have the military exercises going on in Belarus right now. That's just hours from the capital where I am now in Kyiv. That is to the north of the country. Then you have the ongoing crisis and war in the eastern portion of the country. And then, in somewhat of a new element or new development this week, you have this crisis playing out in the Black and Azov Seas. Now, we've seen, according to the Russian media, about 140, they say, warships and support vessels undertaking military exercises. The Ukrainian government this week claiming that those warships are blockading the Black Sea, which is a huge problem for Ukraine because its economy is heavily reliant. In fact, 95% of all exports leave through those ports in the south. It's seen as a huge problem. And the former defense minister telling me that he believes that the Russian president is simply testing the situation to see what he can get away with. Take a listen.
Yeah. What Putin is always doing he's testing waters. So he constantly looks what is the attitude to his actions and what works. If he sees, for example, that he blocks half of the Black Sea and nothing happens, he will continue blocking. So it's just a matter of the response. He looks at the response.
Now, in terms of that response, experts say that the best thing the West can do right now is to continue with the pressure, which includes lethal aid, that diplomatic pressure, as well as sanctions. Guys, back to you.
Now, let's talk more about that. These latest moves by Russia. How has the U.S. responded? Are we sending more troops to Eastern Europe or more resources to Ukraine and other countries to prepare for a potential invasion?
Yeah, all of that is ongoing. I mean, as far as we can tell, nothing has changed in that U.S. posture. There's that $200 million package of lethal aid, and that's been progressively going on. There's something nearly 10 shipments have already been sent and landed in Kyiv. And then, of course, there's that massive troop movement of 3,000 troops that are now moving toward the east, both from elsewhere in Europe and from the U.S. So this is ongoing, and whether or not that's going to change, it's hard to know, because the fact of the matter is a lot of these moves are seen as deliberately provocative by Moscow, even though, from the point of view of the West, all of these drills and practicing all of this is seen as deliberately provocative. If the U.S. does any more, it could risk inflaming the situation even further. Guys?
Matt Bradley, Erin McLaughlin, thank you both.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.